Welcome to the Babblery, conversations where we explore the knowledge, opinions, passions, and obsessions of my guests. This is Suki Wessling, and today's program features conversations about the radical feminist Andrea Dworkin, who died in 2005. Dworkin's name inspires many reactions, and some of them not positive, even among feminists. But I urge you to listen to my guests' perspectives before you make up your mind. My first guest, Pratibha Parmar, is a British filmmaker whose film, My Name is Andrea, is a 2022 documentary about Andrea Dworkin. Pratibha came to the subject of Andrea Dworkin much as I did when I watched her film, with some hesitation based on her memories of the ugly press surrounding Dworkin's public appearances, most notably her stance on pornography. But in making the film, Pratibha explains why she focuses on Dworkin's words, which surprised her in their openness, prescience, and expansive love of humanity. In the second half of the program, local feminist Ann Simonton, a member of the Santa Cruz Committee for the Prevention of Violence Against Women, will speak about bringing the film to Santa Cruz and her work to raise awareness about the continuing violence that persists in much of American private and public life, speech, and attitudes. A longtime friend of Andrea Dworkin, Ann brings a special perspective to the film. My Name is Andrea is being screened at the Del Mar Theater in Santa Cruz on Tuesday, October 18th at 7 p.m. Pratibha Parmar, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Suki, for having me.
I'm really excited to do this interview because I have to tell you that of course, I, as a lifelong feminist, I've known about Andrea Dworkin for many years, and I've read some of her work, but I didn't know what to expect. And your film so took me by surprise that I feel like it's a really important thing to start this interview with, because I know that there are a lot of people out there who have all these preconceived ideas. And So first off, can you explain what inspired you to make the film?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I had never really imagined that I would ever make a film about Andrea Dworkin. And the idea for it was suggested to me by a couple of producers back in London a while ago. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Why are they wanting to make a film about Andrea Dworkin? And so I only knew of her really from the 1980s through her reputation as an anti-pornographer. And I hadn't really ever really read her work. So I decided I would give it a go and start with reading some of her books. So I started with her book, Heartbreak, which is a memoir, and also her semi-fictionalized novel, Mercy. And I have to say, Suki, the two books completely blew me away. I discovered a person who was a woman who was an incredible writer, who was a poet, who had a way of talking about patriarchy, a way of talking about toxic masculinity, about violence against women in a language that was so compelling and really interesting. Apart from which, it was also, for me, what emerged was a story of a woman who had, whose really kind of her lifelong search was to find a voice, to be a writer, to be a poet. And I think so many women can identify with that journey of finding your own voice, asserting it in the world, and then being believed and being listened to. And I think her story really kind of just resonated in that way for me personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, you do something that I think is the thing that surprised me the most. I looked at IMDb first, of course, and I saw the list of actors and actresses, and I thought, what's this about? I didn't think it was, like a fictionalized biopic style thing. And then, I was completely surprised by what you did with it, which, maybe I'll just let you explain how you use the actresses and their voices, because I found it to be really unusual and really beautiful how it brought her words to life.
And that was the key thing, is that I wanted to find a way of bringing her words to life. I wanted to give them a kind of a vivacious life, make these words come alive, because I sort of really took to her writing and to her as a writer, that I felt first and foremost for me was how to kind of present her voice as a writer in the world when she's not here anymore. And also, I think for me, part of it was that she was a figure in history who had been so incredibly misrepresented, but not just misrepresented, but like vilified and dismissed. And I just thought people didn't really know who she was, because once I read her work and once I looked at some of the footage of her that we found, I was like, this is a completely different kind of person, intellectual public speaker, feminist thinker, than the one that we have kind of been led to believe through certain kinds of representations of her in the media and also by some other feminists. And so I just wanted to kind of give her a voice in a way that I felt she never really had beyond the page. And so I actually went through her 13 or so books. I read through and researched and read through a lot of the radio interviews she had done, print interviews she had done, where she's talking about her life, she's giving her opinions on, a variety of different things. And I wrote a screenplay. And so the film is really a hybrid documentary, and it spans 5 decades of her life. And each decade is sort of represented, embodied by a different actor. And what I wanted to do was really bring the essence of that particular decade. What were the turning points in her life at that point? What is it that, and excavate through the film as we move along, is that what is it that formed Andrea Dworkin? What was her foundational moments in her life? What was she exposed to? What was she interested in? And how did her experiences of sexual assault in her own life actually inform her writing and her thinking? And so for me, that was kind of the best way of doing it, was to kind of write the script using her own words, Andrea Dworkin's words, and then have actors kind of really speak to those words and reenact those words and dramatize them in a way that makes us very visceral as an audience. We're in there as not as objective observers looking on, but that we are experiencing her life with her. And to that extent, I also kind of wanted to sort of find a way, I suppose, of allowing and making her life also speak to many different women's lives, particularly in relation to sexual assault. And I think that by taking it, not having actresses who look like her or try and pretend to be her or anything, but just embody that kind of her at that particular moment, it also embodies so many other women's lives in terms of domestic abuse or rape or sexual assault.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting because as you were speaking, you were using words that I had already typed in my notes. Like you clearly, you talked about the hybrid style of the film. And then I have a note here that says use of actresses universalizes her words.
Right.
And it was so successful. Like you said, they don't look like her. They're not trying to be her, though. I think it's Christine Lahti who wears the overalls, which is suggestive of her. But of course, she doesn't look at all like her. Yeah. I found a couple of the actresses particularly, I guess, emotionally effective. And one of them is a poet, Soko. I don't know anything about her.
Yeah. She's actually a musician, and she's a French actress, and my producer Shaheen Hack had seen a couple of her films and thought she had this kind of interiority and intense sort of way of emoting emotions. And so at the time we filmed her, she was living in LA. She's now moved back to Paris. And, we just went and met with her, and she read the script for her section. And she said she really wanted to do it. And so, yeah, I think she is astoundingly, compelling. Her performance is so sort of just, it really draws you in. She draws us in with her emotions, and which I think is just also, and I think not just her, but actually all the actresses really embodied an essence of Andrea Dworkin. So, Andrea Riseborough, the British actress, is the chapter in the film when Andrea Dworkin was in Amsterdam and fell in love with this anarchist, and they lived happily for a number of years before he became an abuser. I think Andrea Riseborough kind of embodies this is sort of a way in which the words that Andrea Dworkin wrote. And I think that, again, that section of the film is, really powerful too. But I think all of the actresses, are just, Ashley Judd, who sort of gives the speeches. That was the era when Andrea Dworkin was giving the speeches, etc. I think that's sort of, it was wonderful to have all these actresses who sort of were, all of them, like Amanda Stenberg said to us, I really want to align myself with projects like this. We didn't have a lot of money, so we were paying we were paying minimum, SAG minimum. So, it was every single actress in this film was in it because they really were committed to the content of the film and to the story that I was trying to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for those who are listening who don't know, Amanda Stenberg played Rue in The Hunger Games, and she's so visible in a sense from that role, yet the role that she plays in your film, it's the time when the real Andrea first starts realizing that she's from this loving family with this really, her description of her father is just lovely. And then this is the time in her life when she has the first experiences of being abused by strange men. And her performance is astounding, really astounding.
Yeah. I mean, she was the first person we filmed. And at the time we filmed her, we had no money. It was very early days. And so we did a crowdfunding campaign and we raised some money. And I was I didn't know whether the full film, we would ever raise all the money to make the film or anything, but I was so keen to capture Amanda Stenberg at that point in her life where she was just 17, and before she would turn into, grow into this fully fledged woman, I really wanted that innocence that she still had, and that she could, convincingly play a 12-year-old. And I think she does, and she brings a vulnerability, which again is just heartrending at moments, I think.
Yeah.
My nom de guerre is Andrea 1.
Yeah, and another scene that I really love that's really not huge in the film, but I think brought Andrea's her expansive love of people, which is not something that people are going to recognize from their idea of who Andrea Dworkin is.
Yes.
But the scene with Allen Ginsberg.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the other things, I think that Andrea was expansive. She, not just in her thinking, but also in her openness to people. And I think her desire from a very young age to be a poet which she nurtured when she was at Bennington College. And that's where she met Ellen Ginsberg, who'd come there to give a poetry reading. And, in her autobiography, she writes about this in a sort of really moving way. And he obviously saw something in her, because she sort of shoved some of her poems to him. And then he wrote to her and he said, if you're ever in New York, come and see me. And she did, and she took him up on it. And they became pretty much lifelong friends. He was a mentor to her, and they became friends up until the time that she published her writings and her activism against pornography. And they fell apart quite acrimoniously around that time, because they had very different positions on it. But, I think that what you say about also her expansiveness, not just in terms of people, but also how what I was also interested in showing, because it interested me, was how she read Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire. She was an activist in the anti-Vietnam War movement alongside Dr. Martin Luther King. Her politics, actually, before she became a feminist, her politics were actually much more global, anti-colonial, and she sort of always kept that, I think, through, even when, after her time in Amsterdam, and she was introduced to the writings of Kate Millett, which kind of completely turned her around. And that's when she became a feminist, because she says, that's when I realized that what I was experiencing as a woman was not a personal problem, it was a political problem. And I think that, even within her feminist politics, she was always mindful of the differences that different women inhabited. So, at the time, the word intersectional was not around, but now, you could say that she had an intersectional feminist awareness, because she talked about poor women. So she was aware of class. She talked about Black women. She was aware of race and racism. And I think, these are the sort of aspects of Andrea Dworkin that I was surprised to discover, and that's what interested me to kind of, show in the film. There was a quote from Leonard Cohen. He was it was so interesting. I came across this when he was. I read an interview with him in Rolling Stone, and when he was on the road, and Rolling Stone got to do an interview with him, and there's a photograph of him on his hotel bed, and he had Andrea Dworkin's book Intercourse on there. And so the interviewer asked him, saying, "Why are you reading this kind of radical feminist who hates men?" And Leonard Cohen's response was really great. I can't quote it at length here, but the gist of it was that he said, this is the kind of writer who really questions absolutely everything, even knowledge that we have inherited for thousands of years and millennials of years. She questions everything and pushes that questioning to the extent that it makes us rethink so many things. And this is how change happens. This is how an expansive view of the world begins to take place. And it was something like that. That's my kind of, gist of his much more erudite, articulate quote.
Yeah, and I also, one of the things that I suppose is the hardest, you include a lot of the archival footage, so we do see her and hear her voice also, and a lot of it is interviews where she's not in control. And the one that I felt like I wanted to reach in and grab him and stop him, the Donahue Show scene.
Yeah.
He just keeps interrupting her. He's not listening to her. He's mocking her and not letting her speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, and when we found that interview, I was like, oh my goodness, we have to show this, and this is part of why I wanted to make this film, was to kind of, in the way that I made it, was to give her a voice in a way, because she was so often not given a voice, even though she went on these shows, primetime shows, which was incredible. I mean, how absolutely courageous and brave of her to go into what I saw as a lion's den, not just with Phil Donahue, but also the audience, and try and really remain true to her own integrity and try and put across, what she thought in a way that, in that interview with Phil Donahue, she says, why is it that no one ever questions male writers' personal lives? Why are you interrogating me? Don't think about what my life is or about me. Read the book. The book is what matters. And I think that's what her lifelong struggle towards the end of her life was that, she really wanted people to read her books, and she found it really difficult to get published. She was published in the UK and some other European countries, but in the US, she had very hard time getting published. And I think that happened because, and one of the things she said, I mean, I think there was many reasons for that. I think part of it was her controversial kind of position on pornography and the civil ordinance that her and Catherine McKinnon kind of put forth, which was the point at which everything blew apart, I think, for her and for the feminist movement. I don't dwell on it too much in the film because I think those debates are very different. Debates around pornography these days are very different kind of debates. Although, the film does mention it and does show her being questioned and also shows the opposition, it wasn't something that I kind of felt like, if people want to know about it, they can just Google it and read about it. But really very different sort of positions on, and not positions, but very different kind of distribution of pornography these days in the age of the internet to when she and Catherine McKinnon were, working against this issue. So I think that, that what happened around that is what sort of then really kind of sort of contributed to Dworkin's kind of fading into into the background. At one point, she had been such a big voice and a loud voice and a vociferous voice in feminist circles, in feminist discourse. But I think after the whole pornography discussion and the kind of really vicious divisions amongst all the different camps of feminists, I think it just she went into obscurity, really.
Yeah, and I was thinking about, she died in 2005. Yeah. So, she's so prescient in so many ways because one of the quotes that I wrote down as I was watching it was that she was compelled to hope for a genderless society. And, so 2005, the iPhone had not come out. YouTube had just started. So the world that we know didn't exist when she died. Yet she is foreseeing, in a sense, and perhaps, I don't know for sure, of course, but there could be a connection between the freedom of and the sudden ubiquity of pornography on the internet and teenagers, young people today having such a forcefully new and different version of how they see gender, which I don't know. What do you think? What do you think as far as what she would think about this? What's happening?
Well, that quote in the film comes from a radio interview she did, I think, in 1973 or 74. So it's really in the early 1970s that she's talking about a genderless society. And in her first book, Women Hatred, she talks about how the gender binary is so not very useful that they should be. And she talked about transsexuals because we didn't have the word trans at that time, so the language was different. But she was aware of the different kinds of genders and gender representations and gender presentations that people could embody. And she said that she found the binary of male-female, this binary is very toxic, that there should be a much freer, much broader way in which we could come to each other as human beings and explore all kinds of different sort of erotic possibilities. So I think on that level alone, she was so ahead of her time. And in a way, she was coming to it also as a kind of philosopher, because I think she was a kind of a philosopher in her own way, that she talked and thought about these, as Leonard Cohen said, these kind of things that we would take for granted, but that, need to be questioned. So because she questioned so many things, she questioned male-female relationships in the most fundamental ways. She was in love with and married to a gay man, John Stoltenberg, for 30 years.
Yeah.
And, they both were committed to, like not looking at the binary of being male or female, and he was exploring in his work a different way of being a man in this world. And she was very much invested in both the kind of, exploring that, but into different kinds and different ways in which men and women could relate to each other, which was equal. And I think that for her, that was the thing that, being human meant being a man. And then women were, then sort of came after that. So the default human was always a male. And she was like, no, the default human is all of us. It is not just men, it's not just women, it's all of us. And I think that for her, the fundamental thing was women needed to be seen as equal. And that equality depended on women being seen as fully human.
Yeah. And I also noticed that and thought, again, if she were still around, seeing the demise of Roe v. Wade here in the States, and this quote from her: "Freedom of speech for women begins and ends with an integrity of the body." And her belief that sexism was stemming from the fact that women were not seen as fully human, that human was male, and that women are something other, that we're the other, and that you can still that see how strongly that runs in our society, and probably not just amongst conservatives.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, what we're seeing, especially say here in the US, we're seeing with the demise of Roe v. Wade and the kind of struggle for in state by state across the US, women fighting for the right to control their own bodies. We're seeing things worse than what, Margaret Atwood wrote about in The Handmaid's Tale. And that's unfolding right now in front of our very eyes. We're seeing, women in Iran fighting for that right to just decide for themselves whether they want to wear a hijab or not wear a hijab. Whereas in India, Muslim women are being completely repressed and censored for wearing a hijab. And so, as recently I was listening to Arundhati Roy, an incredible thinker, and she says, robe her or disrobe her. This is ultimately, it's all about the fight for women having power over women's bodies, whichever culture and country we can talk about right now, that, there is some struggle going on for both control of women's bodies and the struggle against that from women in the grassroots.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that this film, arrives now. And how long did it take you to make it?
Oh my God. It took far too long. It took about 7 to 8 years to make.
Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, having made this film and spent all these years in a sense, living with her. How do you personally feel that she has changed you?
She has continued. Well, I suppose what she's done is affirmed my own journey as a woman of color who has and continues to fight for the space to speak, and to be able to, not to speak, but to speak about what the war on women, the war on people of color, the war on LGBTQ people. I think that she was her courage against so much vilification is something that I kind of always have in my mind when I'm thinking about how there's a way that sometimes people don't want to know about this film because it's Andrea Dworkin. That there been some backlash from some feminists, like, oh, this film is a kind of rehabilitating Andrea Dworkin. Well, actually, it's not rehabilitating, because that's such a wrong word. It's exposing her to be who she was, and I think that's kind of, I feel that her courage to be who she was, was both admirable and at times really, I have thought, oh, there are points at which, Andrea, you should have just relented, stepped back,
But she never did.
She never did, and that was kind of like quite something to behold, really.
My name is Andrea. It means manhood or courage. In Europe, only boys are named it, but I live in America. My name is Andrea.
Ann Simonton, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Suki.
You've been active in the feminist movement since the late 1970s. So, and you were a personal friend of Andrea Dworkin. So let's talk a little bit about that time and about what she was like, and how you met her, and how you saw her as a figure during her life.
Well, she had enormous impact on me. I was a young feminist, and I didn't really start until the 80s, early 80s. I was living here in Santa Cruz, and I went to a Take Back the Night march in San Francisco where she spoke. And 81, I think it was. It could have been 80, but I think it was 81. I was doing activism with a feminist named Nikki Kraft. We got arrested several times together. We were protesting corporate ownership, basically, of women's bodies, but it was always presented in the media differently. As you can imagine, how mainstream media likes to promote any kind of feminist activity. It was a joke, derided. The end of the newscast, well, look at these idiot women out there doing some idiotic thing. And that was a bit of the history. But Andrea, as an individual, her words were full of such ferocity and rage and articulation. Everything was beautifully crafted and beautifully written, but it was filled with this unbelievable level of outrage at the situation we were in. And I related to it as a survivor myself. She also was a survivor. Nikki was a survivor. So I think unfortunately, much of the work to prevent sexual violence has been the responsibility of women who have been hurt by it, by sexual assault and so forth. I can't really even express the amazing level of connection that I felt toward her. She was difficult, though. I never really felt like my work that I did in the video, for example, rose to the level that she wanted me to be clearer about. And she criticized things I did. I did a film called Warning: The Media May Be Hazardous to Your Health. It came out in the late 80s. And it was, it just didn't rise to the caliber of her particular interest. I visited her when she lived in New York, and I just saw a woman who was beaten down because she was so articulate and because she had a rage about violence in general against everyone, that she wanted to wake people up, and people were fearful. This is continuing today. There's a lot of fear. In the beginning of the film, My Name is Andrea, which is a hybrid documentary, she's in England, I think, during this particular quote. She's quoted in the film as saying, "The U.S. and England are not the same country." One of our great writers, James Baldwin, wrote that when European immigrants came to the United States, they really became white. And what he meant was that there was a bottom to our society created by slavery that was black. So that whenever the immigrant came, no matter how despised that person had been in Europe, they immediately had a leg up because the bottom was fixed and the bottom was black. The only equality the founding fathers of our country considered important was an equality among rich white men, that white men of wealth should be equally free from any interference by the state. This left out most people. White women. White women were legally chattel. It left out women of color. It left out the survivors of that slaughter of the indigenous peoples. Freedom, legal and social rights, self-determination, self-sovereignty were denied to most people. Leaving out most people, also men, that society did not use or acknowledge or respect. The creativity of most people, the intelligence of most people, the life experience of most people, the inventiveness, the originality, the perspective, the purpose, the insight of most people. Do you hear the silence? Do you understand the loss that I am talking about when you feel what is missing, what is not there? If you think that nothing has been lost or nothing important, then you believe that these most people have nothing to give. And we call that assumption racism. We call that assumption sexism, and it is staggeringly arrogant. And that's how she begins the film. It is a real game changer in many ways for me, in just acknowledging her personal and cumulative power that she had. She is an amazing orator, and it's also, are we ready now to hear her? Is the question.
This is a question I wanted to ask you. That when, during her life, she was pretty controversial even among feminists. There were complicated feelings about her, yet when you listen to her words that she's speaking in the film, and also that the actresses who are reading her words read them, maybe it's the perspective of being in 2022 or something. They don't sound as controversial as she was then. Why do you think she was so controversial then?
Because she told the truth, Suki, and people do not want to hear the truth about sexual violence. They want it to be dressed up in some sexy little outfit so they can still, pretend, play the games of what that means to, have a relationship that wasn't based on intimacy. It's based on usury and humiliation and degradation that she pointed out was very popular in pornography. It wasn't all that pornography was, but it was a predominant amount of pornography. Mm-hmm. And studies have also shown that even the most benign things, like I was on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, and I became pornography. And that, to me, showed me in a very visceral level what it means to be used and seen fully as masturbatory material. There's not really anything I could say could match that particular experience. Anyone would have to see themselves as masturbatory material to really understand what that means on a wide scale, mainstream level. Mm-hmm. And I think that that the reason she was controversial, Suki, is because she was misunderstood. She was misrepresented. That she was one of the most misrepresented writers in American history, according to John Berger. He has that great quote. He wrote the book Ways of Seeing. Amazing writer, amazing perspective. Being able to see the big picture, I think, is incredibly important in this particular world of us trying to look at where we are. And when we look at rich white men, and we look at this time in society, in this little sliver of time in which we have been brought, they have brought civilization and humanity to its knees with climate change and all the other ruinous kinds of leadership that they have done. And this promotes enormous fear. And so mainstream media ate her up. ACLU called her a censor because they were promoting pornography. They got a lot of money from pornography. They called her a censor, but she didn't want to censor. She never wanted to censor it.
How did they get money from pornography, the ACLU?
Oh, are you kidding? They were big funders because they were fair. You have to remember, ACLU always said, we promote the cigarette companies and we promote those who don't like cigarettes. And then they got to the point where they had to kind of say, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't be really supporting the lies that kept cigarette smoking popular, right? And so ACLU was always getting, the Playboy Foundation was a major donor.
Really?
Look at the books. You follow the money. It's what I'm trying to do with city politics these days. And it is an ugly, ugly picture, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
It's something that we need to do as a community. Progressive voices need to come together and understand that if we want to create a world where there will be diversity in our community and at large, that we need to make changes.
Yeah. And people are not very comfortable with changes.
No, I don't think we ever have been.
Yeah.
And that's partly because of the fear, and the fear is rampant now. The fear of, somebody stole my bicycle or, but we're living this incredible income inequality. Well, what do we expect to happen?
Yeah.
It's we have to provide services. To provide services, you need to pass measures. It's been a part of the whole progressive movement to try to get more in touch with how are we governing ourselves.
Yeah.
So again, I think that we are at a very vital juncture in a very important time. And that's why we're having a film, which I hope can help wake people up. And then we're having sign making so that if there's something that they feel important to be said, that they'll have an opportunity. And then we'll also have a march and a rally where predominantly people of color and those whose voices are most marginalized will be given a voice.
The Santa Cruz Committee for the Prevention of Violence Against Women, which you're on, is hosting this film and having the march. And I assume it's not unintentional that this is in advance of the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, which was designated by the UN in 1999. And so, we've got 23 years since then. Do you think we've made any headway in prevention of violence against women since then?
If you look at the statistics, no. If you look at it in terms of, are we making headway to encourage men to respect women? No. Are we making headway to create communities of support for men who harm women? No. We don't ever want to name the perpetrator. That's one of the biggest problems. We need to name who is doing the harm. And it shouldn't be a surprise that it does tend to be men, even white men, that tend to be the rapists and tend to be the perpetrators. And so that is completely taboo. I couldn't get one male journalist in this community to write anything about this event. And it's interesting. I think it's too much. It's too frightening. It's not popular. There's not, we don't have enough. There's not enough fun in it.
Well, it's not a fun subject.
It will be fun. But the thing is that changing and bringing about seeing one another in person in our commitment to create change is a beautiful thing.
What do you think is the power of getting together in person these days when so many people are sitting at home and clicking like buttons?
I think getting together in person is vital to recognizing who we are as a community. It's vital to recognize our neighbors and our friends and recognize who shows up, because showing up in community is important. And it's an exciting time, I believe. And I believe that this joining together was always a part of what Commission for the Prevention of Violence did, which they often hosted Take Back the Night marches, or they hosted walks and gatherings of people, because preventing violence, very much a part of that is our community, is engaging with our community to give it a voice and to find out what's alive and what's needed right now as they sense it.
About the film, My Name is Andrea. It's a film about someone that I would say most people, even women and men who consider themselves feminists, might not want to see. First, I want to talk to you, have you respond to what was your personal experience when you watched the film for the first time? What did you go through?
Well, I mean, it has a very powerful message about violence against women, because you are privy to some of her personal experiences. And I think that because it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month and Prevention Month, it's even more important for us to really see what does the domestic violence look like. And it happens between people who say they love one another. And that is a very important thing for us to recognize, is how can it turn from this incredible connection and love to ownership, violence, and domination and battery. Mm-hmm. And it has for many of us. It has in my life. I've had a boyfriend turn on me and have that happen. I think that it's happened to many of us in a variety of ways, large or small. And you could either get out easily or you could not, especially with children. If you have a child, it becomes even more difficult to have safety nets and be able to get away from that. And so coming together as a community with the film, I think that lots of people will like seeing the movie because it can stir emotions that are important for us to face and look at. And to do that in community is much more important than just sitting alone at home and watching like the movie Blonde on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen that yet, but very popular. It's Joyce Carol Oates' take on Marilyn Monroe. Feminists that were afraid of Andrea Dworkin didn't read her books. That people who misunderstood her or thought she was controversial just looked at her. Mm-hmm. They did not engage with her. So I think that when you mentioned that, that people might not want to see this film, I think people really want to see this film, and that it may not be the parts of them that go into something and think, they're going to be entertained and they're going to be, this is more about confronting your own nightmares, maybe, or confronting the reality of our situation. And yes, sometimes people shy away from that, but I think, and I know a lot of people are coming from the film department up at UCSC, and it's getting a lot of interest because it can be transformative. And I believe her words are transformative because they coalesce the whole TQ BIPOC world that we are living in, and that, that we have all this diversity that we do not give voice to. We do not appreciate, and look at where we are as a result of slaughtering indigenous people who were botanists and biologists and were far smarter than any. The savages were us. We were the savages, not the people of the indigenous people who lived even here in Santa Cruz, where they were very highly populated area, one of the most populated areas in our nation, actually.
You said that the numbers, if you look at the numbers, we haven't made any headway in prevention of violence against women. As far as our culture goes, Do you think that that young people look at this problem differently than when you were young? Has there been any headway in the culture?
I think definitely there's been headway in the culture, that young women are more often empowered to take their lives seriously, and their right to be seriously, their right to be left alone seriously, their right to fight back more seriously. And yet, if, as a prevention organization, the commission, our job is to prevent violence before it happens. And we can continue to put on the Band-Aids or put the onus on the female and say, you got to do this, and you got to change this, and you got to wire this, and you can't go there, you better not do that. And I think what's important about Andrea's film also is she always considers race and class, and she ties it in such a beautiful way that we need to understand that deeply, because we don't. Abortion rights, not for the wealthy. They'll still find a way. They'll find a way. The poor won't. And what does that mean? That means if you have an ectopic pregnancy and you're poor, you may die from it exploding in your body. Just so many things that are important for us as a community and as a nation to really reckon with. And that's why I think people should be excited about the film and not feel like, oh, this isn't going to be a fun film. In a way, it is a fun film because it celebrates our ability to transform as a community and also to acknowledge the harms. And there's always a way out. There is a way out of sexual violence, say, for example. I believe that we could end domestic and sexual violence and rape if we made a more concerted effort of it. We entertain ourselves with violence, rape, and humiliation of women. In every film, there's like a regular portion of the film where where's the sex scene where she gets raped, or the victim's running from someone, especially as Halloween approaches, where, see more of that. And this has to change. It has to stop. I mean, even the games the boys are being taught to play, you can go on Grand Theft Auto and beat up prostitutes and kill them for points, and you get your money back if you go take the money back from the dead body that you've just slaughtered with various different instruments that you can use in the little game. And it's wildly popular. And we tried in California to make it something that was for older kids, and the industry is so large you're infringing on the free speech rights of that 8-year-old. That's the world we're in. Mm-hmm. It's litigious. It is run by wealthy white men, and we need to take ownership. I think we are now the majority of people. So it's kind of like, and they're frightened. They want to do these drastic things because they want full and total control over our lives and our bodies.
So let me ask you to finish by speaking to men who believe that they are not perpetrating violence against women, that they are part of the solution. What do you want them to take away from not just the film, but what Andrea Dworkin wrote and stood for?
That's a big one. It's important that we need men, and we need you. We need you as allies. We appreciate your leadership to stand up and to speak out against this violence, to be on our side, to work to stop it, to educate your youth, to be a good role model, to teach respect for everyone, not just women, but everyone and everything around us. And that this is, it really is, in a way, an indigenous way of looking at how we need to come around to honoring one another, that everyone is sacred. People are sacred. Their bodies are sacred. They are not to be used and abused. And men have an opportunity to do that in a way women will never be able to do. And it's a beautiful awakening, I think, for a lot of men to stand up and say, yes, I want to end sexual violence. I want to end domestic violence. I want I want my daughters to feel safe in the world, and my sisters and my mother, all that they love, all who they love, their partners. It's a call to be more compassionate with themselves first, because it's not about blame. There's no blame in any of this. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about recognizing the humanity in all of us and standing up for what they believe is right and what they believe is would help create a safer and more equal world. Really, it to me, it's a no-brainer, and I know a lot of men that are on our side, and it's exciting and wonderful to see, and we just need more of them.
Indeed, we do. Thank you, Ann Simonton, for sharing your perspective and your advocacy.
Okay, thanks so much, Suki.
Living a meaningful life is about all that we can do as human beings in order to survive with any kind of real dignity. How empty it would feel to go through life and not have done anything where you say, okay, I put it on the line. I put myself on the line. I put my life on the line. I made a decision about what matters and what is essential to this moment in the human community in which I live. And I did that, and I am proud that I did that.
You've been listening to filmmaker Pratibha Parmar and activist Ann Simonton sharing perspectives on the new documentary, My Name is Andrea. The film is being screened at the Del Mar Theater in Santa Cruz this coming Tuesday, October 18th at 7 p.m. It is followed by a March for Women's Rights on Thursday, October 20th at 6:30 p.m. at the Santa Cruz County Courthouse. You've been listening to The Babblery. Please visit www.babblery.com for links and information related to this podcast.